Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, 1950 McChord Air Force Base. If you ever want to remind yourself that the Pacific Northwest has been playing host to skybound weirdness for decades, you don't need to look any further than the chilly winter night of January 22, 1950. Long before modern tech workers were looking up from their devices to ponder local anomalies, McChord Air Force Base down near Tacoma, Washington, was staging a full-blown close encounter that made military radar operators question every law of physics they had ever been taught. This wasn't some sleepy weekend hoax cooked up by folks sitting around a campfire with a flashlight. This was a high-strangeness rodeo starring trained military personnel, ground-based spotters, scrambled fighter pilots, and an uninvited guest that treated aviation engineering like a polite suggestion. The circus kicked off when radar operators at McChord locked onto a stubborn, uninvited blip cutting across the evening sky. Right out of the gate, the object made it abundantly clear it wasn't a standard propeller-driven puddle jumper or a stray weather balloon. The radar data registered the target hurtling along at speeds exceeding 900 miles per hour. To put that into perspective for 1950, that velocity was absolute science fiction well beyond the capabilities of any operational aircraft in the US or Soviet inventory at the time. It was a time-traveling speed demon long before anyone had even dreamed of breaking the sound barrier on a routine Tuesday. Naturally, staring at a ghost on a radar screen wasn't going to satisfy brass command. So the base did what any red-blooded Cold War military installation would do. They scrambled interceptor pilots to go have a polite word with the trespasser, while ground spotters nervously grabbed their binoculars. What they witnessed looked less like a structured metal aircraft and more like an airborne psychedelic rave. Witnesses on the ground and in the air described a blindingly bright, glowing disc-shaped craft that treated color theory like a mood ring, dynamically shifting from brilliant red to electric blue to searing stark white. The object didn't just fly. It performed aerial acrobatics that would have instantly turned a human pilot into strawberry jam. It executed razor-sharp right-angle turns, plunged and climbed at dizzying speeds, hovered silently, and came to dead, instantaneous stops before rocketing off in a totally new direction. In short, the McChord encounter delivered a terrifying message straight to the heart of the Pacific Northwest : something was sharing our airspace, and it was playing by an entirely different set of rules. When a glowing, color-shifting disk decides to buzz a United States Air Force base at 900 miles per hour, you can't exactly sweep it under the rug with a broom and pretend it was just a flock of particularly ambitious geese. The January 22, 1950 encounter at McChord Air Force Base didn't just rattle the radar operators in Tacoma. It sent immediate shockwaves through the military-industrial complex and triggered a classic mid-century dance of leaks, media curiosity, and frantic government hand-waving. Within hours of the incident, the internal military channels were humming with a mixture of awe and sheer institutional terror. Naturally, in an era when secrets leaked through the cracks faster than water through a cheap tent, whispers of the McChord encounter slipped out to the press. Local and national newspapers eagerly picked up the story, splashing headlines across breakfast tables, while the public was already swimming in a cultural soup of post-war anxiety, sci-fi B-movies, and a rapidly growing national obsession with flying saucers. The timing couldn't have been worse for the Pentagon, which was trying to maintain a pristine illusion that America's skies were entirely secure. Inevitably, the file landed on the desk of Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official, perpetually overwhelmed UFO investigation branch. Blue Book's investigators faced a brutal administrative pickle. They cycled through the usual greatest hits of skepticism. Was it a top-secret experimental U.S. aircraft? Unlikely, unless Lockheed Martin had secretly invented a flying disco ball that could defy the laws of momentum. Could it have been an optical illusion or a bizarre radar anomaly? Possibly, except for the tiny detail that ground witnesses and scrambled interceptor pilots both laid eyes on the glowing, shape-shifting menace as it ran circles around their airspace. When you have a shiny, hypersonic object pulling off maneuvers that make your best fighter jets look like stationary lawnmowers, swamp gas just doesn't cut it. In the end, the Air Force had to slap the ultimate bureaucratic stamp of defeat on the file. Unexplained. They couldn't prove what it was, but they certainly weren't going to admit it belonged to little green men either. The McChord encounter carved out a permanent, glowing spot in the grand tapestry of mid-century UFO lore. It served as an early, unmistakable warning shot to the military. Trained, sober-minded personnel, men whose entire job descriptions involved knowing what was in the sky, were repeatedly watching things they couldn't identify, shoot down, or explain. It added heavy, credible bricks to the growing fortress of evidence that civilian researchers would spend decades building against official government denial. The McChord Air Force Base incident of January 22, 1950, remains a masterclass in high-strangeness friction. It captured the exact moment when high-tech military radar crashed headfirst into the impossible. Decades later, the case continues to tantalize researchers and torment skeptics, precisely because it resists a neat, tidy box. The object flew away into the Pacific Northwest night, leaving behind no wreckage, no debris, and no neat little executive summary. Just a bunch of bewildered airmen, a shattered set of aerodynamic assumptions, and an enduring reminder that every now and then, the universe drops by unannounced to remind us who's really running the skies. If you want to understand how a battle-hardened military man reacts when the laws of physics are casually shattered right in front of his face, you don't need a textbook on quantum mechanics. You just need to look at the poor souls stationed at McChord Air Force Base near Tacoma, Washington, on the freezing night of January 22, 1950. Before that evening, the radar operators and flight crews at McChord had a pretty straightforward job. Watch the skies, track conventional propeller planes, drink way too much coffee, and generally assume that the United States military was the undisputed baddest apex predator in the local atmosphere. Then, an uninvited guest showed up, treated their airspace like a frictionless playground, and left a trail of psychological wreckage that no amount of military discipline could quite patch up. The circus began not with a dramatic roar in the clouds, but with a terrifying, silent blip on a radar scope. For a radar operator in 1950, tracking aircraft was an exercise in steady, predictable geometry. You watch standard blips crawl across a screen at sensible speeds. But the object that locked onto McChord's radar didn't crawl. It teleported through the concept of velocity. The gear registered the target blazing along at over 900 miles per hour. Imagine sitting in a dark, humming radar shack, smoking a cigarette, when your equipment suddenly informs you that a glowing mystery object is screaming across the Pacific Northwest at speeds that made contemporary aviation engineering look like a wooden cart. The immediate reaction of the radar crew wasn't awe, it was sheer, unadulterated administrative terror. Did the scope break? Did a tube blow? Is the base radar possessed? No, the equipment was fine. The target was real, and it was currently executing maneuvers that suggested it didn't believe in gravity. Naturally, you can't just let a max-speed mystery blob hang out over a critical Air Force installation without saying hello. Base Command did what any red-blooded Cold War outfit would do. They scrambled interceptor pilots, while ground-based spotters scrambled out into the bitter cold with binoculars. What those pilots and spotters encountered that night completely fried their internal logic circuits. They weren't tracking a sleek, silver Soviet bomber or a lost commercial liner. They were chasing a blindingly bright, disc-shaped craft that treated color theory like a mood ring, rapidly shifting from searing electric blue to fiery red to stark, blinding white. And its flight pattern? Pure, unadulterated disrespect for human physiology. The object would rocket across the sky, pull an instantaneous 90-degree right-angle turn without slowing down, hover in dead silence, and then vanish into the stratosphere. If a human pilot tried to mimic those maneuvers, their internal organs would have instantly separated from their skeleton. Up in the cockpit, our brave interceptor pilots didn't feel like Top Gun aces. They felt like bewildered toddlers trying to catch a laser pointer with a butterfly net. When the object finally zipped off into the Pacific night, leaving behind no sonic boom, no debris, and no rational explanation, the real torture began, writing the report. Imagine being the squadron commander trying to brief the brass the next morning. Well, sir, we chased a glowing color-shifting saucer that flew at 900 miles per hour, stopped on a dime, and laughed at our interceptors. It is a fantastic way to get your flight status revoked and a mandatory appointment with the base psychologist. Within hours, the story leaked out of military channels and crashed headfirst into local and national newspapers. The public was already swimming in post-war alien fever, and the McChord incident poured gasoline straight onto the cultural bonfire. Naturally, the file was eventually dumped onto the overflowing desk of Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official, perpetually overwhelmed UFO debunking clearinghouse. Blue Book's investigators faced a brutal administrative pickle. They cycled through the usual greatest hits of skepticism. Was it a secret U.S. spy plane? Unless Lockheed Martin had secretly mastered interdimensional travel, no. Was it swamp gas or a weather balloon? Hard to argue when multiple radar stations, ground witnesses, and combat pilots all laid eyes on a structured high-speed light show. Cornered by data they couldn't explain and witnesses they couldn't discredit, the Air Force did what governments do best when reality gets too weird. They slapped an unexplained stamp on the file, shut the drawer, and pretended it never happened. The McChord Air Force Base encounter of January 1950 left a permanent, restless dent in the history of military aviation. It proved that when the universe decides to drop by unannounced, even the most disciplined, radar-trained military personnel are utterly helpless. The object flew away into the night, but it left the men on the ground with something far heavier than a security breach: the creeping, paradigm-shattering realization that they were no longer the masters of their own skies. And long after the files were buried, those airmen knew the truth. They had spent a cold January night chasing a ghost that was laughing at the edge of tomorrow. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archive Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown, Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below. Share your thoughts on today's episode.